WGC, I need to holler at y'all right quick. So what I need you to do is give all your problems to God, but let me hold that attention right quick. I want to loosely address the arcade versus simulation debate and how it correlates to gameplay. And the reason that I say loosely is because these two things are secondary to the real main topic of this discussion. And while this particular subject holds precedence over both the arcade and simulation arguments, it still manages to not only respect these two sides, but include them in a very meaningful way. But real quick, before we jump into it, man, I need y'all to do me a favor. If you rock with the content, go ahead and hit that thumbs up on the way in and hit that subscribe button as well. Now that we're done with the formalities, WGC, lock in and let's work. So there are very few instances where a happy medium is found within a fan base. And like I said, the arcade versus simulation debate has been going on for quite a while now. And over the years, I've been deeply rooted in team simulation, meaning that I want this game to be a legitimate pro wrestling experience above everything else. But it cannot be to the detriment of fun factor or the overall immersion. Those are the two things that are uncompromising. So what's the fix? 3 words, 1 phrase. Attention to detail.
The f is that?
Hold on, check me out. Because on one side you have the misconception that simulation is this long, drawn out, immersion breaking, hyper realistic style of gameplay. Where on the other side we got people saying that the arcade style is this fake over the top, no selling 50 finishers, unrealistic immersion breaking gameplay. And if both sides were to be completely honest, I think we can all agree that these are extremes. And the truth of the matter is there is a lot of middle ground to work with. And here lies where the attention to detail could be the solution to all of our problems. And I do want to take a second to give some props to VC's dev team, because it does seem like they've been kind of already moving in this direction. I mean, if you just take a look at the backstage brawls, I think this is a pretty good showing of arcade and simulation style gameplay working well together, because they gave us those more arcadey Easter egg style spots, like throwing people off the top of the SmackDown fist. But at the same time, they don't bounce like balls, and you can be KO'd from that. So, like I said, it's a good mix. And this is the happy medium that I would love to see them continue to strive for. So what I would like to do is give you guys some examples of why attention to detail might be a much better option as opposed to leaning too far arcade or too far simulation, as well as how it could be beneficial for both new and existing gameplay features. And for the sake of this argument, let's look at the chain wrestling feature. Now, personally, I love this feature and I'm glad to see it back. But it is one of those features that I feel like VC went a little too simulation on in terms of the pacing. And this is a perfect example of what I feel like should have been more of an attention to detail feature, because I would have much rather them focused on things like taking into account the different fighting styles, the different weight classes, adding more transitions and attacks. Some lucha options would have been dope, and maybe even having some subcategory features like test of strength. Another thing that throws off the pacing, in my opinion, is the minigame. Honestly, I would have rather preferred something more simplistic, but we'll do a deep dive on that later. But for right now, the point I'm trying to make is it does not have to be a slow-paced, overly simulation feature. The same could be said for the blow-for-blow feature, and while I do like the minigame, they definitely need to turn up the attention to detail. I would love to see a much wider strike variety with this feature, and maybe even throwing some grapples or position changes for the enders. Again, this is another one I plan to speak about in detail in another video. And then we have, in my opinion, by far the most neglected aspect of gameplay, the submission mechanics. If there is one feature that is definitely void of all attention to detail, it would definitely be this one. The lack of any sort of effort or creativity when it comes to submission gameplay is definitely a huge problem, and it's one that will not be fixed simply by throwing recycled minigames at it. And I've been singing this same song for well over a decade now. Trust me, this goes back way before I ever decided to start a YouTube channel. The problem with submissions is they lack any kind of substance. And this is where I feel like some very purposeful attention to detail would be beautiful work. Details like a legitimate crawling system, realistic rope breaks, and the option to ignore that rope break, a 5 count, submission reversals and transitions, and throw in some meaningful and well-timed camera cuts. These are all base level components that make up a pro wrestling submission spot. And I stand on the belief that if VC can manage to implement these things, that the submission gameplay would go crazy. Now, shifting focus to a feature that I would love to see make a return, and is pretty much in the same vein as submissions, that being the wear down / rest hold feature. And while this definitely will be considered more of a simulation style feature, much like the point I made with chain wrestling, this does not have to be chained down by the stigma of being overly realistic or slow paced or immersion breaking, things that some fans would associate with the more simulation style gameplay. Ironically enough, I think the breaker concept would be a perfect mechanic in this situation. Just give us 3 options to either rest, wrench / attack, or drain. Resting will see you regaining a portion of your stamina. The attack / wrench will obviously do damage to your opponent. The drain option will take away a portion of your opponent's stamina. The sequence will consist of 3 quick rounds where each time you will have to select one of the 3 options. And just like the breaker system, if your opponent is lucky enough to guess the option that you picked, then they would break out of the hold. But if you're able to successfully get through all 3 rounds without your opponent guessing your attack, then you would end the sequence with a limb target attack for extra damage. Easy work. I think this is a decent enough concept to where things won't come off as overbearing or too minigame centric. Because again, going back to the chain wrestling, that's one of the things I kind of have a gripe with, having to focus so hard on the minigame that you kind of take yourself out of the gameplay itself. But that's just my take on it. Now moving on to something that's just as, if not probably more so, void of any attention to detail or creativity, and it's also something that we spoke about in lengths on this channel, that being the limb damage and injury selling system. And unfortunately, these things, or the lack thereof, are a detriment to this game's pro wrestling persona. Because I'm sure most fans of pro wrestling will agree when I say that they are both extremely important when it comes to in-ring storytelling. Not to mention the depth and strategy that it could actually add to the gameplay, man. I mean, it's tragic when you think about everything that 2K is leaving on the table. And I'm going to say this again just to reiterate, but this is another one that does not have to be overly simulation. It's not about having a guy roll around for 15 minutes to sell an injury. It's more so about giving these type of injuries purpose. And please don't misunderstand, because I would love to actually have some visual representation of injuries such as limping, or guys like, maybe grabbing a limb and holding on to it. As much as I hated the fighting stances, the one thing that it did prove is that VC is very capable of allowing wrestlers to change their fighting stances, or whatever you want to call them, mid-match. So instead of having those goofy fighting stances, like, why not replace that with some limping? But along with the visual aesthetics, limb damage has to have an effect on gameplay to some capacity. Whether it be in the form of your offense, such as not being able to lift opponents or collapsing under the weight, and even your striking ability if it involves the limb in question. Same goes for mobility. Maybe you climb the ropes a little slower, or you can't run for a little bit of time. And these effects don't have to remain consistent for the entirety of the match. I don't want it to be a situation where, like, oh crap, I got a damaged leg, now I can't run for the rest of the match, or I'm not going to be able to lift anybody anymore. That's not what I mean, and really that falls in line with what we were talking about earlier about having things going a little too far simulation. Instead, I would like to see a scenario where it's like, okay, I have a badly damaged limb. There's a chance that my leg might give out if I attempt this lifting move. Or there's a chance that I might collapse in pain if I hit this super kick. I think if they approach it from this perspective, along with some visual cues, man, we might have one of them ones, bro. It would make things fun, but not too intrusive. But I would much rather have something like this than nothing at all. Because I've said this countless times on this channel. One thing I cannot stand in these games are empty features. Like, why put it in there if it doesn't mean anything? Bottom line is limb damage and injuries have to mean more and do more than just being a little colorful UI silhouette. And this is another one that I stand on the belief that just with a little bit of attention to detail, this could be a truly W feature. Weapons is another one of those things that kind of lacks substance and attention to detail. VC does get some applause for some of the stuff that they've been doing lately. I'd say between 2K24 and 2K25. We have things like Sandman's White Russian Leg Sweep, RVD's Van Daminator, and now on to The Undertaker's Urn, as well as Triple H's sledgehammer, which has some special and unique like animations with it. So as you can see, there is a semblance of individuality and some attention to detail thrown in there. But this is very surface level. From a foundational perspective, man, that's when all of this stuff goes out of the window. We legit have very little in the way of like weapon interactions and functionality. Even with the things I mentioned, the weapon gameplay doesn't even come remotely close to the likes of SmackDown vs. Raw 2011. And that in itself is a huge problem. There is no way that a game that is over 10 years your senior should be that superior to your current offering. Like I said, man, when you look at the weapon physics and gameplay from SmackDown vs. Raw 2011, it's nowhere near close. And like I said, man, I definitely want to give VC their credit for the stuff that they are attempting to implement. But at the same time, I want to keep it all the way solid and be very transparent. And the truth is, a couple of Easter egg style weapon interactions is not going to cut it. There are just so many things missing on a foundational level. Something as simple as having different animations for light and heavy attacks. We need weapon grapples and animations for all weapons. Also, some positional attacks would be nice. For example, there should be different strike animations and interactions for wrestlers who are down on the mat. Things like targeting a specific limb or being able to choke someone with the end of a chair. Give us some weapon finishers for the more offensive style weapons. Things like the chairs, bats, kendo sticks, sledgehammers. Why are those things left out in the cold? I mean, we have ladder and table finishers. Weapon functionality is another area where this game falls short. I would love to return to the days where we can open and close chairs, stack tables, wedge ladders into the turnbuckle, and maybe even give us some new functionality like being able to create a ladder bridge inside the ring. And one of my personal favorites was actually being able to drag your opponent over to a ladder and sandwich them in between the ladder. And of course, we also cannot forget about the weapon reversal. VC has to ditch the one-size-fits-all philosophy when it comes to weapon reversals. I get so tired of seeing the same animations for everybody. Bro, where's the variety, man? Where's the creativity? But I'm gonna chill out before things go too far left. Basically, what I'm trying to say is that weapons is an aspect of gameplay that could use a ton of creativity and attention to detail. But that's just my take on things. WGC, y'all know what to do, man. Let me know down in the comments how you guys feel about the whole attention to detail argument. Are you someone who feels like they should just stick to simulation style gameplay? Or are you someone who prefers their wrestling games to be more arcadey and over the top and not taking itself too serious? Personally, no matter where you land on this subject, I think it's one thing that we can all agree on is that attention to detail just makes for a better overall experience. I want to truly thank you guys for rocking with your boy and checking out the content. It really means a lot to me, man. Do me a favor. Please hit that thumbs up on the way out because it really does help out the channel. Also, if you enjoy talking about gameplay and gameplay concepts, go ahead and hit that subscribe for your boy. You know what I mean? Love y'all. All glory to God. And remember to try to be a blessing to somebody. Later, WGC. Yay.